Hey everybody, welcome back. Your average jeweler here. Today, we get to talk gemstones again, specifically Aquamarine. If I can get a raise of hands, who's heard of Aquamarine? I'm gonna guess if you're watching a video about gemstones, you've probably heard of it. It's certainly one of the most common ones out there, and it's almost literally defined by its color. So, somewhat straightforward. But today, we're talking 5 things that make Aquamarine a very unique gemstone. Let's get into it. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. I very much appreciate it. If you haven't hit the like button, please do that. It actually helps others to see this video. There's a YouTube algorithm and everything. Can't explain it technically, but if you can like the video, more people have a chance at seeing this content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It's free. You keep up to date on what's coming out on the channel, and you can see all of these things we're trying to learn about. So with that said, let's get right into Aquamarine. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the color because, as I mentioned before, it kind of explains itself. Aquamarine literally means the color of the sea or the color of water, and so it's blue. Very often it's lighter saturations of blue, and many times it has a little bit of green to it, particularly when it hasn't been treated. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk the basics. Number 1, Aquamarine is Beryl. Does that mean anything to any of you? Probably not. What if I said morganite? That's also a variety of the mineral beryl. How about emerald? I'm guessing more of you have heard of emerald. These are all the same mineral. Beryl is aquamarine, it's morganite, it's emerald. It comes in some other colors that have names you probably haven't heard of, heliodor. But the bottom line is, this is actually a mineral that's widespread, but not only does it come in different colors, it has very different characteristics from one color to the next. Because of these little trace element variants and the environments it grows in, you're going to find one characteristic that can be very consistent in the color of aquamarine, and something's going to be entirely different when you start talking about emeralds. The second thing you should know about aquamarine is that the crystals can be massive. And I'm not talking about, a crystal that's maybe as tall as my head, which would be very big for a lot of gemstones. I'm talking crystals that can be over 100 pounds. Yes, gemstones that are typically referred to in carats, which are fractions of a gram, actually come in pounds, 100 pounds and more in some cases. Huge, huge crystals. And while there are some other gemstones that you can find this in, for something like this, considering that it's sister minerals in other colors like emerald, large stones might be as big as my fist, to find crystals that are bigger than me and larger than that is an interesting thing. And again, it blows my mind. I start thinking about it and I can't stop thinking about it. The third thing I want you to understand about aquamarine is that it's generally a very clean crystal, and I'll continue to compare it to its sister-related gemstone, emerald. Emerald is notorious for having lots of inclusions or things that are breaks in it or something other than the genuine pure crystal structure. But aquamarine is different. Aquamarine is known for being a very clean, clear gemstone. And it breaks up into a class. They don't grade gemstones typically like they grade something as a diamond. A diamond has more finite type of clarity grading. We've talked about the SIs, the VSs. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out some of my diamond videos. But with gemstones, you'll hear them talk about clarity classes and types. You have type 1, type 2, and type 3. Aquamarine is a type 1 gemstone, and what that means is that they expect it to be clean the majority of the time. That doesn't mean you can't find included aquamarine. In fact, there's plenty of it out there. You should expect it to be less expensive. But when they look for aquamarine, in nicer qualities, pieces that are going to be used for jewelry, nice jewelry especially, you expect it to be very clean and transparent and not have a lot of distracting breaks or wisps or cracks or anything like that. Type 2 gemstones is, as you might think, a little bit of a slightly included category. And then you get into your type 3, and these are gemstones that we expect most of the gemstones to have inclusions. Emerald again falls into this category. It's one that's notorious for having a lot of inclusions, but it's interesting that not only can you find these massive crystals of aquamarine, but you can find massive big crystals that are also very clean and transparent, and it makes for amazing specimens or crystals that haven't been cut up or made into something else. It's really fascinating. Now, the fourth thing I want you to know about aquamarine is it has a very unique crystal habit. And by crystal habit, I'm talking about what the gem crystal usually grows like. And most crystals have a typical habit, meaning a typical way that they'll grow in their shapes naturally. Diamonds look bipyramidal, they look like two pyramids stacked on each other. You think of quartz, where oftentimes it comes to these points. And then you look at something like aquamarine, and it's very interesting because the crystals are often very columnar, if that's the right word. They look like columns, and they usually grow with 6 sides. They're hexagonal, and these columns, these 6 sides, they're very, very clean. They're very straight. I mentioned transparency. This obviously helps with being able to see through the stone when you have these clean, straight edges and sides. And then more times than not, you'll have flat terminations, the termination being how the crystal ends. All of these things are pretty unique to something like Beryl. Again, these are not hard and fast rules. They do have variation depending on the environment they grow in, but it's pretty interesting that when you look at a natural aquamarine crystal, you can usually identify what it is because of the way it grew. It's incredibly unique, and that's the fourth thing I think you should remember about aquamarine. Speaking of liking aquamarine, I hope you like the content on this channel, and please hit the like button if you haven't so far. Again, we want to get this information to as many people as possible because I think it's really fun and interesting. Number 5 is the treatments of something like aquamarine. I think it's important to understand typical treatments, how they handle most gemstones, and aquamarine is no exception. While aquamarine doesn't usually have to be treated for things like inclusions, they don't necessarily want or need to clean up the crystal unnaturally, the color is an interesting thing to talk about here. I mentioned earlier the color of aquamarine being blue, usually a less saturated light blue, and many times in its natural color, there are hints of green in there. And if you see an aquamarine that has a more greenish hue to it, there's a high chance that that has not been treated. Why is that? Well, because they commonly heat treat aquamarine to make it more of a pure blue. They seem to have come to this general conclusion that most people prefer a pure blue color versus something that has more of that greenish tone to it. I can appreciate both, but I can also understand where this logic comes from. So generally speaking, they heat treat aquamarine in a way that burns off, I believe it's iron. If I'm wrong, hopefully I'll put it in the comments here, but I believe it burns off the iron in the stone, which causes the yellowing. And when they burn that away, they end up with a pure, more natural blue that apparently is the more broadly pleasing color. Now, when we talk about treatments, we usually talk about imitations and fakes and simulants. The first thing I would mention is that an imitation can be another natural gemstone, in this case, blue topaz. Now, blue topaz is a created color most of the time, and so they have several different varieties of blue topaz. And there's a sky blue color that could very easily be confused with reasonable quality aquamarine. So that might be the first thing to know, is that there is a natural counterpart. Blue topaz is much less expensive because it's far less rare than nicer aquamarine gemstones. But you do also have lab-grown variety of aquamarine. You're always going to have glass and plastic, which are a bit more easy to identify. The point is, even in a stone like Aquamarine, you want to ask the right questions if you're in the market for it, and be aware that there are other options. And if you want Aquamarine, make sure you're getting Aquamarine. That would be my only statement there. Now, of course, I'm making this video early spring because March is Aquamarine for its birthstone. And while there are some other obscure stones for March when it comes to birthstones, we're not really getting into that today. Sorry to disappoint you if you wanted a whole bunch of obscure gemstones. I wanted to focus specifically on Aquamarine, give you 5 interesting facts about it, and hopefully educate you a little bit on something interesting, because I think it's a very cool gemstone. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. If one of these things you had a question on, or maybe you liked more than the other, let me know in the comments. I want to know, out of these 5 interesting characteristics, if one of them was a surprise to you or caught you as interesting. But as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you keep coming back so we can keep learning together.